Your job is to work and make a living. Fiona's still finding her path." Those words from my father cut deeper than any knife could. There I sat, fork frozen midair, surrounded by the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon, watching my family show their true colors for the thousandth time. I'd spent 30 years being the responsible one. 30 years of picking up Fiona's slack. 30 years of hearing how special my little sister was while I just got pats on the back for being reliable. And now they wanted more. "We think it would be fair if you helped out financially while Fiona gets back on her feet," Dad continued, like what he was asking was completely normal. "You're doing well, and she needs some support while she focuses on her future." I looked at my sister lounging across from me in her designer boots that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. At 30 years old, she still hadn't held down a job for more than 6 months. "You mean, you want me to pay for her?" I asked, still processing the audacity. Dad shrugged casually. "It's family. She's your sister." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "She's 30. She's had years to figure things out." Fiona frowned, playing the victim as always. "Wow, Marianne, you always make me sound like a failure." "Because you don't do anything," I snapped, years of resentment finally boiling over. "You don't work, you don't pay bills, and Mom and Dad keep enabling you." The room went silent. My father's expression hardened. "Watch your tone," he warned. "Not everyone's like you." That's when something in me broke, the final thread snapping after decades of strain. "My job?" I repeated, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "My job is not to support your favorite child." Mom's voice turned icy. "If you have a problem with how we do things, you know where the door is." I looked around at their faces, expectant, entitled, completely blind to their own manipulation. They thought I'd back down like always, play my assigned role as the family ATM. "Fine, I'll leave," I said, grabbing my purse. "And you can start paying your own bills, because I'm done helping any of you." The shock on their faces almost made 30 years of unfairness worth it. Almost. That night I drove home with tears blurring my vision. But something else was growing inside me too. Freedom. For the first time in my life, I'd chosen myself. What I didn't know then was how that one moment of courage would change everything. Not just for me, but for all of them too. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most? If you have, you'll feel this story deep in your soul. And if you know that kind of pain, hit subscribe. Not because it helps me, but because stories like this remind us that sometimes silence and strength are the best revenge. The favoritism didn't start at Thanksgiving dinner. It began the moment Fiona was born. I was 4 years old when my parents brought home this tiny, screaming bundle they called my sister. "She's special," they'd whisper, as if I couldn't hear. "She's going to do amazing things." By the time I was 8, the pattern was clear. Christmas morning told our family story better than words ever could. Fiona would unwrap mountains of colorful toys, art supplies, and whatever else caught her fancy that year. Me, I got practical gifts, clothes for school, educational books, things that would build character. "Marianne doesn't need toys," my mother would explain to relatives. "She's our responsible one." At 10, I brought home straight A's on my report card. My parents glanced at it and said, "That's what we expect from you." Later that same day, Fiona failed her spelling test, but managed to draw a creative doodle that the teacher praised. My parents hung it on the fridge and took her out for ice cream. "She sees the world differently," Dad would say proudly. Artists need encouragement. I learned to clap for Fiona's accomplishments, no matter how small. I learned to shrink my own successes, to expect nothing in return for excellence. That was just how our family worked. When I won the 6th grade science fair, my parents couldn't attend because Fiona had a cold. When I fell off my bike and broke my arm at 12, I was told to be brave, while Mom stayed home with Fiona, who was too sensitive to visit hospitals. I started to wonder what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I special? Why wasn't I worth celebrating? By 13, I stopped trying to compete. Instead, I built a wall around my heart, brick by brick, disappointment by disappointment. I turned my pain into determination. If I couldn't be the favorite, I'd be the strongest. If I couldn't be celebrated, I'd learn to celebrate myself. The seeds of resentment were planted, watered by years of unequal love. I just didn't realize then how tall they would grow. My 16th birthday wasn't marked by a sweet 16 party like my friends had. Instead, my parents sat me down for an important conversation about responsibility. "We think it's time you got a job," Dad announced, sliding the classifieds across the table. "You need to understand the value of hard work." I spent that summer working 20 hours a week at the local grocery store, bagging items and collecting shopping carts under the hot sun. My paychecks went straight into my college fund that my parents managed. 2 months later, Fiona turned 16. Her gift? A shiny blue Honda Civic with a big red bow. "Your sister needs transportation for her art classes," Mom explained when she saw my face. "You understand, right? You've always been so mature about these things." I did understand. I understood exactly what I was worth to them. That pattern defined our high school years. I joined every academic club, maintained perfect grades, and worked part-time jobs. Fiona bounced between hobbies, failed classes, and got caught drinking at parties. My parents called her free-spirited and hired tutors to help her pass. When I was inducted into the National Honor Society, my parents couldn't attend because Fiona had an art show the same night. Just 3 people had shown up to see her watercolors. My entire row of seats at the ceremony sat empty. "Your sister really needed our support," Mom said afterward. "You're strong enough to handle these things on your own." Strong enough. The words that excused their absence from my life. The divide between us grew wider when I was accepted to 5 colleges, but could only attend the state university on scholarship. Meanwhile, my parents took out a second mortgage to send Fiona to a prestigious art institute after she barely graduated high school. "She needs the right environment to flourish," Dad explained. "You'll be fine anywhere. You always are." Those years taught me a painful lesson. Excellence was my obligation, while mediocrity was Fiona's privilege. College brought freedom, but not from family expectations. While Fiona partied at her $50,000 a year art school, I juggled full-time classes with 30 hours of work each week. I lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, eating ramen and working night shifts at a call center. Fiona lived in a private dorm with a view of the city, posting Instagram photos of gallery openings and weekend getaways with friends. "We're so proud of how independent you are," Mom would say during our brief phone calls. Those calls always ended the same way, with updates about Fiona's latest artistic breakthrough and how much her professors loved her vision. What they never mentioned was how they drained their retirement accounts to cover her tuition. I only discovered that truth years later. During my junior year, I won a prestigious accounting internship. When I called home with the news, Dad cut me off mid-sentence. "That's great, honey, but can we talk later? Fiona's having a crisis. She failed her portfolio review and needs us to fly out there." My graduation day should have been a celebration. I'd finished with honors, secured a job at an accounting firm, and done it all without financial help. My parents attended the ceremony but left immediately after. Fiona had broken up with her boyfriend and needed emotional support. The real punch came 3 months into my new job, when Fiona called crying about her student loan payments. "I can't afford them," she sobbed. "And Mom and Dad are tapped out. Please, Marianne, just until my art career takes off." I should have said no. Instead, I set up automatic transfers of $400 a month to help with her loan payments, money I could have used for my own loans, my own future. "You're such a good sister," my mother said when she found out. Fiona's lucky to have you. Lucky. As if my sacrifice was just good fortune for her. I didn't realize then that I was setting a dangerous pattern, one that would continue for years until that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. By 30, our lives couldn't have been more different. I had a steady career, a modest apartment I'd saved years for, and a 401k I contributed to religiously. Fiona had ideas. So many ideas. "I'm starting an Etsy shop," she announced one month. 3 months later, "I'm going to be a YouTube star." 6 months after that, "I'm writing a novel that's going to change everything." What these dreams had in common was their complete lack of follow-through and their constant need for funding. The calls always came late at night. "Marianne, I can't make rent this month. The landlord's threatening eviction." "Marianne, my car broke down, and I need $800 for repairs." "Marianne, I need to buy supplies for my new business. It's an investment, I promise." Each time I'd transfer the money while my parents cooed about what a good sister I was. What they never mentioned was their own monthly contributions to Fiona's lifestyle. I only discovered those years later. "You're so lucky to be independent," Mom would say. "Fiona just wasn't built for the corporate world like you." That word again. Lucky. As if my hard work was just good fortune. The worst part? I believed them. I thought maybe I was cold, unartistic, too practical. Maybe Fiona really did need more help. Maybe this was just what family meant. The expenses grew larger. When Fiona decided to open a pop-up gallery that failed after 2 weeks, she needed $3,000 to cover the lease she'd signed. When she crashed her car, the third one my parents had bought her, she needed $20,500 for the deductible. My savings account dwindled while my resentment grew. I started dreading holidays, family dinners, even phone calls. Each interaction left me feeling drained and used. "You're the only one she listens to," Dad would say when I tried to push back. "She needs your guidance." What they meant was, she needs your money. By the time that Thanksgiving dinner rolled around, I'd given Fiona over $25,000 in loans that everyone knew would never be repaid. I was exhausted, financially and emotionally. I just didn't know that dinner would be the breaking point. The drive home from Thanksgiving was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Tears blurred the road ahead while my phone buzzed nonstop with messages. "Mom, you're overreacting." "Come back, Dad. Your mother is upset. Is this how we raised you?" Fiona, "Wow, way to ruin dinner. Drama queen much?" I turned my phone off and just drove. That night was my first taste of freedom, real freedom, in 30 years. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by silence instead of demands, and felt something strange, relief. The guilt came in waves over the following days. Was I being selfish? Heartless? Was I abandoning my family when they needed me? Then the messages changed tone. "Mom, your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of your behavior." "Dad, your mother isn't sleeping. Is this what you wanted?" Fiona, "I might lose my apartment because you're being so stubborn." They were playing the same old cards, but for once I wasn't picking them up. 2 weeks of silence turned into a month, then 2. I blocked their numbers after the 47th guilt trip text. For the first time in my life, I started focusing on me. I joined a yoga class. I redecorated my apartment. I got the promotion I'd been working toward for years. And I started seeing a therapist who used words like scapegoat and financial abuse that made me uncomfortable, but rang true. 3 months after Thanksgiving, I met Darius at a coffee shop. He was kind, straightforward, and refreshingly honest. On our 3rd date, I told him everything about my family. "They trained you to be their backup plan," he said simply. "That's not love. That's exploitation." No one had ever validated my feelings that way before. No one had ever told me I deserved better. With Darius's support, I started rebuilding my identity beyond the responsible one. I discovered I actually enjoyed painting, something I'd avoided because it was Fiona's thing. I traveled. I made new friends who valued me without expecting handouts. 6 months of silence turned into a year. The guilt messages eventually stopped. I thought maybe finally they'd gotten the message. I was wrong. You know what hurts the most? Not what they did, but that I still tried to make them proud after everything. If you've ever given people too many chances, you already understand this pain. Don't just scroll, subscribe. Join people who've been through it too, because you deserve stories that make you feel seen. I moved across town 3 months after that Thanksgiving, not just to a new apartment, but toward a new life. The extra 15-minute commute was worth it to be in a place where no memories haunted me, no ghosts of family obligations lingered in the corners. My new therapist, Dr. Kemp, helped me see what I'd been blind to for decades. What you're describing is a classic family dynamic, she explained during our second session. The golden child and the scapegoat. It's not about who you are, it's about the roles they needed you to play. Those words cracked something open in me. I wasn't defective. I wasn't cold or unlovable. I'd been cast in a role without my consent, then punished for playing it too well. Your boundaries aren't selfish, Dr. Kemp reminded me weakly. They're necessary. Slowly, I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I opened a separate savings account that no one could access but me. I practiced saying no to small things first, then bigger ones. I learned that putting myself first wasn't selfish, it was survival. Darius became my rock through it all. Unlike anyone else I'd dated, he never saw me as the responsible caretaker. He saw me as a woman deserving of care myself. You know what I love about you? He asked one night over dinner. You're rebuilding yourself without bitterness. That takes real courage. Was he right? Some days I felt brave. Other days I just felt tired. Tired of the year's worth of birthdays and holidays I'd spent alone. Tired of jumping whenever my phone rang. Tired of explaining to well-meaning friends why I didn't just make up with my family. But with each passing month, the weight on my shoulders lightened. I slept better. I smiled more. I discovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of family expectations. I was finally becoming the person I might have been all along if I hadn't been so busy being what everyone else needed. Then came the call that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday evening when an unknown number lit up my phone screen. After a year of silence, I almost didn't answer. I wish I could say it was forgiveness that made me pick up. It wasn't. It was curiosity. Marianne? My father's voice sounded older, shakier than I remembered. We need your help. The familiar weight settled back onto my shoulders instantly. I almost hung up. What happened? I asked instead. The story spilled out in fragments of shame and panic. After I'd cut them off, Fiona had launched her dream business, a high-end boutique featuring local artists. My parents, desperate to keep their golden child happy, had backed her with the last of their savings. The boutique failed within 3 months, but that wasn't why my father was calling. What came next was worse. She took out loans, he said, his voice cracking, in our names, without telling us. The familiar mix of shock and not shock washed over me. Of course she had. She'd never faced consequences before. Why would she start now? How much? I asked. The number made me sit down. $175,000 across multiple loans and credit cards, all fraudulently obtained using my parents' information. Money spent on inventory that wouldn't sell, a lease they couldn't break, and, I later discovered, a 2-week business research trip to Paris. Now the bank was threatening foreclosure on my parents' house. Their retirement accounts were empty. My father, at 68, had started working nights at a warehouse just to cover basic expenses. We didn't know where else to turn, he admitted. Your mother's not sleeping. She cries all the time. The old me would have already been writing a check. The new me felt something different, a cold clarity. What about Fiona? I asked. What's she doing to fix this? The silence told me everything. She's struggling, my father finally said. This has been very hard on her. She's staying with us while she figures things out. Of course she was. Even facing financial ruin and possible fraud charges, my parents were still protecting her, still enabling the very behavior that had destroyed them. I took a deep breath. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I felt guilty, but because for the first time, I saw the full picture of my family's dysfunction with perfect clarity. I need to see them, I told Darius the morning after my father's call. I need to see this mess for myself. He looked worried. Are you sure? They've hurt you so many times. Was I sure? No. Part of me, a dark, wounded part I wasn't proud of, felt a twisted satisfaction. They'd chosen Fiona over me for 30 years. Now they were facing the consequences of that choice. But another part remembered my father's voice. In all my life, I'd never heard him sound afraid. Until now. I'm not going to save them, I promised Darius. But I need closure. Real closure, not just silence. That night, I called my father back. I'll come on Saturday, I said flatly. I want to see everything. Bank statements, loan documents, all of it. His relief was audible. Thank you, Marianne. We'll have everything ready. And Dad, Fiona needs to be there too. A pause. She might find that difficult. Of course she would. Facing consequences had never been her strong suit. Then I'm not coming, I replied, my finger hovering over the end call button. No, wait, he said quickly. She'll be here, I promise. As I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. For the first time in our family dynamic, I was the one setting terms. I was the one with power. I spent the next 3 days preparing myself emotionally. I made lists of boundaries I wouldn't cross. I practiced phrases with my therapist. That won't be possible. I can't take that on. That's not my responsibility. The night before the meeting, Darius held me close. Remember who you are now, he whispered, not who they trained you to be. As I drove to my parents' house that Saturday morning, 30 years of memories flooded back. The childhood holidays where Fiona got everything she wanted, the teenage years spent working while she played, the adult life drained by constant financial emergencies that were never really emergencies. What would I find in that house? Would they be truly desperate, or was this just their most elaborate manipulation yet? The truth was worse than I imagined. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. The house I grew up in had always been meticulously maintained, my mother's pride and joy. Now, it looked tired, paint peeled from the window frames. The once perfect lawn was patchy and overgrown. My father opened the door before I could knock. He'd aged a decade in 1 year, hair thinner, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. Marianne, he said, reaching for a hug I didn't return. Thank you for coming. Inside, the changes were even more dramatic. Gone were the expensive decorations and furniture. The living room felt bare, with obvious empty spaces where items had been sold. My mother sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She looked up when I entered, eyes red from crying. Hi, Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. In the corner, slouched in an armchair, was Fiona. She didn't meet my eyes. just picked at her fingernails with practiced indifference. Even now, with everything collapsing, she wore designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. "So," I said, setting my purse on the table, "let's see the documents." For the next hour, I reviewed a horror show of financial destruction. Credit card statements showing $30,000 shopping sprees, loan applications with forged signatures, overdue notices from banks, lawyers, collection agencies. "How could you let this happen?" I finally asked, looking directly at my parents. My father sighed. "We thought she was getting better. She said the boutique would solve everything." Fiona rolled her eyes. "The timing was bad. The location wasn't right. It wasn't my fault." 30 years of the same excuses, never her fault, always someone else to blame. "What's your plan?" I asked my parents. Ignoring her, they exchanged glances. "We were hoping you could help us sort this out," my mother said carefully. "Maybe a loan to get us through until—" "Until what?" I cut in. "Until Fiona's next brilliant idea bankrupts you again?" The room went silent. Then my father, voice breaking, said what I never thought I'd hear. "We made mistakes, Marianne. With both of you. We know that now. Too little, too late." But something in his defeated posture struck me. They were broken, not just financially, but emotionally. "I'll help you," I said finally, "but not her, and there are conditions." My mother's face lit with hope. "Anything." I pulled a document from my bag, one I'd had my lawyer draw up the day before. "Fiona signs this. It's a financial separation agreement. She gets no more money from you, ever. No more loans. No more bailouts. No access to your accounts or credit." Fiona shot to her feet. "You can't do that." I met her eyes calmly. "I'm not doing anything. This is their choice. Take responsibility for once or find someone else to destroy." "You can't be serious," Fiona hissed, her face flushing red as she stared at the document on the table. "This is blackmail." I kept my voice calm. "No, this is reality. Something you've been sheltered from your entire life." The financial separation agreement laid out everything in clear terms. No more money, no more bailouts, no access to our parents' accounts. Complete financial independence. The thing I'd been forced into at 16. "I won't sign it," she declared, crossing her arms like a defiant child. My mother reached for her hand. "Sweetie, maybe we should consider—" "Consider what?" Fiona snapped. "Letting her control our lives? She abandoned us for a year and now she swoops in with conditions?" Dad rubbed his forehead, the weight of decades of poor choices visible in the slump of his shoulders. "Fiona, we don't have options anymore. The bank is taking the house in 30 days. "So sell something else," she shouted. "There has to be another way." I almost laughed. "There's nothing left to sell. You've taken it all." My parents exchanged a look I'd never seen before, a mixture of fear and dawning realization. For the first time, they were seeing the monster they'd created. "We need Marianne's help," my father said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "If this is what it takes." Fiona's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're choosing her? After everything I've been through?" "Been through?" I repeated, incredulous. "What exactly have you been through, Fiona? Having everything handed to you? Being rescued from every consequence? Draining our parents' retirement so you could play businesswoman?" She stood up, hands shaking. "I'm your daughter!" she screamed at our parents. "You can't do this to me!" My mother started crying, soft, broken sobs that filled the silence. My father looked older than his years as he pushed the document toward Fiona. "Please," he whispered. "We have nowhere else to turn." For 3 agonizing hours, Fiona alternated between rage, tears, and manipulation. She promised to change. She threatened to never speak to them again. She claimed she was having panic attacks and couldn't possibly work a normal job. Every tactic that had worked for 30 years. But something had changed. My parents, facing homelessness and financial ruin, finally saw through the performance. "Sign it, Fiona," my father said firmly, "or find somewhere else to live. Today." Her hand trembled as she finally scrawled her signature, tears dropping onto the paper. "I hate you," she whispered, looking directly at me. "I hate all of you." As she stormed out, slamming the front door behind her, I felt no satisfaction, only the heavy weight of what should have happened years ago. When I finally stood my ground, they called me heartless. But tell me, where were they when I was breaking? If you've ever had to choose peace over people, this channel is your space. Subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who took their power back. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I got a text from my mother. "Fiona got a job at Sunflower Cafe, first day today." I stared at my phone, trying to process this information. My sister, who once declared that service jobs were beneath her creative talents, was waiting tables. Reality had finally caught up with her. Over the next months, I got sporadic updates. Fiona had moved into a tiny studio apartment, the cheapest she could find. She'd been late to work 4 times in the first week. She'd broken down crying when a customer yelled at her about a wrong order. "It's hard watching her struggle," my mother admitted during one of our brief phone calls, "but she's actually showing up every day." 6 months after the confrontation, I agreed to meet my parents for coffee. They looked better, thinner, less expensive clothes, but the haunted look had faded from their eyes. They'd sold the house and moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Dad was still working nights at the warehouse. Mom had taken a part-time job at a florist shop. "How's Fiona?" I asked, stirring my latte. My father's expression was complicated. "Different. She's learning the hard way." According to them, Fiona had been fired from the cafe after 2 months for attitude problems. She'd spent 3 weeks unemployed, panicking as her rent came due with no one to call for help. Then she'd found another job at a local bookstore. This time, she'd lasted. "The manager says she's actually good with the customers," Mom said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "She knows a lot about books." I wasn't ready to see Fiona yet, but something in me softened slightly at the thought of her actually working, actually trying. 8 months after the confrontation, I ran into her unexpectedly at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect hair. She wore jeans, a simple sweater, and her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Our eyes met across the produce section. I braced myself for anger, accusations, drama. Instead, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement, before quickly pushing her cart in the opposite direction. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but in that brief moment I saw something I'd never seen in my sister before: dignity. The dignity that comes from standing on your own feet, however shakily. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. "It was weird seeing you today. I'm still mad, but I get it now." 7 words that told me more than all her tearful performances ever had. She was growing up. At 31. 1 year after the confrontation, my mother asked if we could meet for lunch, just the 2 of us. We sat across from each other at a small cafe. Nothing fancy, just a quiet place with good soup and awkward silence. "I need to say something," she finally began, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. "Something I should have said years ago." She looked up, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry, Marianne. I'm so deeply sorry for how we treated you." The words I'd waited decades to hear, yet now that they'd arrived, I wasn't sure how to feel. "We favored Fiona," she continued when I didn't respond. "We told ourselves it was because she needed more help." "But that wasn't fair to you." I took a careful sip of water. "Why now? Because you need me?" She shook her head. Because losing everything made us see clearly. We've had a lot of time to think about where we went wrong. My parents had downsized drastically. The house they'd lived in for 30 years, gone. The luxury car, replaced with a used Honda. My father, once so proud of his executive status, now worked midnight shifts loading boxes. Your father struggles to admit it, she said softly. His pride is still difficult. But he knows we failed you. She reached across the table, not quite touching my hand. We've started seeing a counselor. He's helping us understand how we created this mess. Part of me wanted to say it was too late. Another part recognized genuine change when I saw it. Fiona's different too, Mom added. She visits once a week, brings groceries sometimes, small things, but real things, I finished for her. We talked for 2 hours that day, not just about the past, but about their plan moving forward, the debt consolidation program, Dad's upcoming retirement, their smaller, simpler life. We're learning to live within our means, she said, something we should have taught both our daughters. As we parted, she hugged me, a quick, hesitant embrace. We don't expect forgiveness, she whispered. We just hope for a chance to know the daughter we never really saw. On the drive home, I realized something important. Their awakening wasn't about me. It was about them finally facing themselves in the mirror. And maybe that was enough. 2 weeks after lunch with my mother, I got the news I'd been working toward for 3 years, partnership at the firm. They unanimously voted you in, my boss announced. Youngest partner in the company's history. That night, Darius took me to dinner to celebrate. Under the stars on the restaurant's rooftop, he dropped to one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. You're the strongest person I know, he said, his eyes shining, and I want to spend my life with that strength. Will you marry me? The ring was simple, elegant, nothing flashy or excessive, just like the love we'd built. Solid, real, and true. Yes, I whispered. Absolutely yes. We set the wedding date for spring, a small ceremony with close friends. The question of family lingered unspoken between us. Do you want to invite them? Darius finally asked one evening as we reviewed the guest list. I thought about it for a long time. Yes, I decided, but on my terms. Those terms were clear. They could attend as guests, not as traditional parents of the bride. No speeches, no walking me down the aisle, no pretending we were a normal family with normal history. We understand, my father said when I called with the invitation. His voice carried a new humility that still surprised me. My relationship with my parents had evolved into something cautious but honest. Weekly phone calls, occasional dinners. They never asked for money. They showed interest in my life without trying to control it. The boundaries I had established remained firm. When my father hinted about helping Fiona with a security deposit for a new apartment, I simply said, "That's between you and her, as long as it doesn't break your financial plan." He backed down immediately. You're right. Old habits. Fiona and I maintained a distant peace. We exchanged brief texts on birthdays. She sent a congratulations card when I made partner. Small steps toward something that might never be close, but could at least be civil. The greatest victory wasn't the partnership or even the engagement. It was waking up each morning without that heavy weight of family obligation crushing my chest. It was learning that I could be a daughter without being a savior. I'd lost the family I thought I needed to please. I'd gained the life I deserved to live. Sometimes the best revenge isn't making others suffer. It's refusing to suffer yourself. The smell of roasted turkey filled our apartment as I checked the dining table one last time. Crystal glasses caught the light, reflecting tiny rainbows across the white tablecloth. A centerpiece of fall flowers brought warmth to the setting. Everything looks perfect, Darius said, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. You've outdone yourself. It was Thanksgiving again. 1 year since I'd walked out of my parents' house and into my own life. 1 year of growth, healing, and rebuilding. This Thanksgiving would be different. No performance of family harmony, no walking on eggshells, just Darius and me, plus 2 couples who'd become our closest friends. "Do you miss them?" Darius asked carefully as I adjusted a napkin. I considered the question. "I miss who they could have been," I answered honestly, "but not who they were." The doorbell rang, signaling our friend's arrival. The apartment filled with laughter. The clinking of glasses, stories shared around the table. No one mentioned my family. These people knew enough to respect my boundaries. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed with a text. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance down. "Mom, we're thinking of you today. Hope you're happy." 5 simple words. No guilt trip, no demands, just acknowledgement. I showed Darius the message, and he squeezed my hand under the table. "Are you going to respond?" he asked. I looked around at our gathered friends, at the home we'd created together, at the life I'd built from the ashes of what came before. "I am," I replied, typing 2 words back. "I am." Because it was true. I was happy. Not the fragile, performance-based happiness I'd chased for so many years. Real happiness, the kind built on self-respect and boundaries. Some might say walking away isn't revenge. That revenge requires making the other person suffer. But I've learned something more valuable. True revenge is refusing to let someone else's toxicity define your life. My revenge wasn't cutting them off. It wasn't watching them struggle. My revenge was healing. My revenge was freedom. My revenge was this moment, right here, surrounded by genuine love instead of obligation. Sometimes revenge isn't about payback. It's about peace. And if this story touched you, subscribe right now. Because somewhere out there, another person is watching in silence, needing a reminder that they're not alone, and your one click might help them find it.